Well, welcome to the next talk in the series, Genesis, the first three chapters. When I started the series, I made the point that the first three chapters of Genesis provide the foundations for all human relationships and our relationship with God. It's definitive, it's prescriptive. When we got to chapter 2 in my previous talk, we observed that God had declared it's not good for man to be alone. We are gregarious beings. We need companionship. We need helpers, suitable helpers. And after that general application of our gregarious nature, we then come on to this portion in chapter 2 and verses 22 to 24. God brought Adam and Eve together. The man Adam said, "This is now bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman, for she was taken out of man. For this reason, a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh." Well, in Mark's Gospel, chapter 10, Jesus quotes that final sentence, but he also first states that God, from the beginning, made them male and female. And St. Paul also takes up that quotation in Ephesians chapter 5, and makes a particular reference to marriage, but also the way in which marriage is a great model for Jesus Christ and his church. But it's worth asking what constitutes marriage in a Christian understanding. One thing is quite clear: all the paraphernalia which surrounds a wedding ceremony is not marriage. But however a couple do enter into that union, whether it's through a church service or in a civic context, both in law and in the church, that couple is recognised as man and wife, although some of our friends in the Roman Catholic Church take another view. In recent years, the acceptable boundary of what constitutes a Christian understanding of marriage has been pushed beyond the biblical pattern, which is between a man and a woman. The term marriage, in one sense, has been hijacked to cover other unions, and particularly that between people of the same gender. This is a case of the prevailing culture dictating social mores, which are at variance with biblical teaching. That such a couple love each other, that they want to spend their life together, is not in question. That's not being challenged. The contentious issues have to do with gay sex and whether such unions could ever be constituted as marriage in the biblical sense. Some Christians who support gay marriage justify this interpretation by saying that love trumps all other biblical or scriptural teaching. This liberal approach to scriptural hermeneutics is a big dividing issue. Regrettably, too many hardliners, whether they be conservative in their understanding of Scripture or liberal, tend not to be able to discuss these matters in sensible ways. To support the biblical understanding of heterosexual marriage does not mean that such people are homophobic or unloving. Far from it. Equally, those who take a liberal understanding or root on biblical interpretation are not necessarily uncaring about their Christian discipleship. Caricatures are very unhelpful in Christian dialogue, as is the practice of mudslinging and name-calling. Jesus made the point that God made them male and female from the outset, and that a man and woman come together in what has traditionally been understood as marriage. This couple commit to be together for life and to have an exclusive relationship of faithfulness. Again, traditional roots into this union throughout most cultures is via a public ceremony, and the social recognition that this gives to this new union. In a number of Western cultures, this public start to the union has been eroded by couples drifting together into cohabitation, for instance. Now, many do this out of a genuine and permanent commitment to each other. But for some, it seems that they're putting the relationship on trial or experimenting rather than being committed. It can be as easily broken as it is embraced. The Genesis text, taken up in the New Testament references, speaks of the two becoming one. Now, this is a clear reference to sexual union, sexual intercourse, but it also has a wider application. In the Anglican marriage ceremony, one speaks of the two belonging to one another, of a new life together. And these phrases suggest that the union is a bond which is more than just sexual union. They become a unit within society. This does not obliterate their individuality, but it does challenge ideas of individualism. Now, whilst I contend that the biblical pattern of heterosexual union is intrinsic to the Christian understanding or idea of marriage, nevertheless there are a number of legitimate variations or models of family life. For instance, it doesn't just have to be one man, one woman, and 2.4 children. Community living has been experimented with. Non-sexual platonic relationships, cohabiting siblings, etc. These are just a few of the arrangements that have been entered into. They can often involve loving, caring relationships, but they're not to be confused with marriage. Neither are they inferior in any sense. Sometimes legal and financial arrangements punish such households in ways which make their relationship seem inferior. This merely adds to the clamour to extend the understanding of marriage beyond its biblical definition. You know, when Jesus finished quoting the words from Genesis in that passage in Mark 10, he famously added this: "Therefore, what God has joined together, let man not separate." But it seems today as if people want to rewrite that and say, what God has separated, let man join together. Marriage, as outlined in Genesis, the Gospels, and the Epistles, involves one man and one woman in a commitment to lifelong, faithful, and exclusive union. To use the term marriage for any other arrangement would be to hijack or dilute the term. Regrettably, the idea of the biblical model of marriage is difficult to sustain, too difficult for some. But that is especially where the Christian church must be particularly loving and non-judgmental. Ultimately, the Christian church should be the family par excellence, in which all people feel at home and accepted, regardless of their marital status, regardless of their successes or failures, regardless of their sexuality. I find it instructive that it was at a time or moment of critical tension over matters of sex and infidelity. I'm talking about the woman caught in the act of adultery in John's Gospel, chapter 8. It was at that moment that Jesus exhibited clear condemnation of wrong sexual behaviour. Leave your life of sin, he said, whilst accepting, caring and comforting the woman herself. I don't condemn you. The leaving and cleaving of Genesis chapter 2 and verse 24 is still the normative Christian model of marriage. And now something to discuss or reflect upon. In practical ways, how might you strengthen the biblical view of marriage whilst also making one's church a broad, inclusive and non-judgmental family. Well, thank you for listening, and look out for the next talk in this series, Genesis, the first 3 chapters.